I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
And those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto.
I'm Matt Bernico. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois.
This week we're talking about a spicy press release from the Vatican that's got all the bloggers talking. It has like 3 commenters talking, but they've got some great things to say. Before we do that, Matt, what have you been up to?
School's over, so I've been doing some end of the school year. Yeah, I did it. I'm surprised. Did some end of the school year kind of work. Got to do all that good assessment. Getting my course evals. They're funny. And just wrapping things up over here on my end.
Did you get any really good gems of any evaluations? Yeah,
I did. I did. All of my major courses were all fine, and students seemed to really like me, and that was nice.
Nice.
I did teach this sort of senior capstone where students did not like me as much, which is fine. I mean, they don't have to like me, but I did feel like I was getting trolled a little bit in them. It was a class that was literally about mass incarceration, and students were upset that there were not enough conservative voices, and I don't really find that to be that troubling to me, like that there aren't any conservative voices in a class like that, because literally, turn the news on and you'll get enough conservative voices to last a lifetime. Just look somewhere else. I don't know. It's also kind of troubling to me. Read
literally anything.
Yeah, for sure. It's also annoying to me too because it's a class where they're doing a research project and I'm there to help them with their research method more than I am to teach them the content. So it's if they wanted conservative sources, then they should go find them. But anyways, me over here just being a typical college professor.
Typical. Yeah. Really radicalizing the youth, gonna send them back to their youth pastors all upset.
I hope so. Yeah.
Did that ever happen to you? Did you ever get any of those narratives said about you when you were going to a liberal Christian college?
I'm sorry, to my youth pastor? Did my youth pastor warn me about them or something? Or
yeah, or were people in your church suspicious that...
No, totally. Yeah, so I grew up in a Nazarene church, which is a whole nother brand of Protestantism that's really bizarre. It's more conservative than Methodism, and it's between Baptists and Methodism, maybe Nazarenes. And I ended up going to a school that was not a Nazarene school, and my youth pastor said, "Oh, well, I hope you have a good time being wrong with all the Methodists." It's literally almost the same denomination, and they still said that kind of stuff to me, and it's get real. It's so dumb. I can't even with that. I remember being really kind of nervous about it, though, when I was kind of coming out of high school, that something it would be a really bad experience, to go to college, and I my first year, I know I was really guarded for that reason because of the impact that people in my church had on me. So.
Huh.
That was a bummer.
That's funny.
Yeah, did you have that kind of experience?
I mean, it's a bummer.
Yeah, it is.
Not exactly the same, because I don't know. My adolescence was weird because I was really into evangelicalism, and my parents didn't like understand it, but they like went to the church that I ended up going to for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when I was away at school, I came back talking to my parents about like reading Karl Marx. And my parents are good parents, so they're like, "Hey, what's that about? That's cool that you're like into something." But my mom would tell me all these stories about how like people that they knew that they went to church with would be like, "Did you know that your son's reading Karl Marx? You should probably check that out, probably get on him for that." And my mom was like, "Well, it's probably good that people like read books and think really hard about them, and then they stop going to that church." So
Sick.
like
That's
the
good.
narrative was there, but my family was like, "That's a stupid thing to think." So
Yeah.
we got lucky.
This is kind of wild. I was in a philosophy of religion class that I really loved. And I read St. Anselm because like that was one of the readings, and like somehow I read St. Anselm, and I became a universalist after I read it because like hell like wasn't a part of it, so I was just like, oh man, well Anselm's got all the answers, and then I told my mom, and she was very upset. So
yeah, parents that don't understand.
I know. Parents that don't understand medieval theology.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
What did you do this week?
What are you
Sorry,
gonna do?
kind of like off topic there. We got off track.
That's my fault. I put us on that with that weird track. This week I've been cleaning up my apartment a bunch because you're gonna come here tomorrow.
Yeah.
So yesterday I was like, I better have a clean apartment for my friend to come to, and it was also the Queen's like birthday or something. Queen Victoria's. I don't know. It's very unclear to me, but it's a holiday in Canada. So there were fireworks all over my like block basically all night. So that's what I've been doing. Trying to sleep, cleaning my apartment. I don't know, doing the usual.
That's cool. I appreciate you cleaning up your apartment. Looking forward to sleeping on your couch. It's gonna be a great time. I guess the
Yeah, I
next
think so.
next episode of the Magnificast you will hear is going to be from on location in Canada. So get ready for that.
Man, I hope so. Yeah, we gotta find some time.
Yeah, we can.
If we can ever get out of the Matrix at the virtual reality store.
Yeah, that's right. We can just do it on the train.
That's true.
Traincast. Speaking of trains, let's get back on track. This episode. Ooh.
You did it. You saved us.
I did it. So this week we did something that was kind of fun. We read a press release from the Vatican about economics and ethics. Dean, do you want to go ahead and give a stab at the old Latin there and the title of this thing? Because I know I can't do it.
Oh boy. I don't know. I'm just going to embarrass myself if I do it because I'm Catholic and it's going to be wrong. So I'm just going to say, what's a good way of renaming this document here?
The English subtitle is Considerations for an Ethical Discernment Regarding Some Aspects of the Present Economic Financial System of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and the oh my God, what is that word? Dicastery? Good God.
Yeah, that's it.
The Faith and the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. So first of all, I want to say I have a degree in communication, and I have taught several classes on public relations. I swear to God, if I ever saw a press release like this in any other context, I would just be done from the very beginning. There's no sense in which this is okay as a convention of the field. Vatican folks, get at me if you want someone who can write a press release. Jeez. But anyways, it's a cool press release nonetheless, despite this this actually buck wild off the rails kind of title. You get the idea about what it's about, ethical discernment in economics. And that is basically what the press release is about. It's a intervention that the Vatican has made, I guess on the behalf of the Pope. That's kind of the undersigned. And it's pretty interesting and pretty fun. Overwhelmingly liberal, and it has a lot of really funny comments kind of attached to it in the comments section. So we're going to talk about that today, and probably kind of dunk on it a little bit. But the comments that I've read that other more conservative commentators have made about this have made me way more sympathetic to the views of this document. People,
it's like you wish the document was what the commentators are worried about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if it really was a sort of George Soros funded Marxist document, it would be way better. But okay, well, so we're gonna get to the actual document itself in a minute. Basically, just kind of large overview. The idea behind it is that the Vatican thinks that economics should be something that we think of ethically, which is pretty straightforward Catholic social teaching from my understanding. They think that profits should ultimately benefit people and never just be sort of for the sake of profits. And that's cool. I like all of that. It's just a really basically a very compassionately written Keynesian economic document with lots of kind of Catholic inflection. And we're going to get to some of it in a minute. But before we do, we're going to start off by just kind of enticing you by reading some of the great comments that people have left about this document. So Dean, do you want to read the first one?
Yeah, sure. So these comments come from a number of places on the internet, but this is a really good one. So the document, it says, identifies imperfection and excesses in the world financial system. Even the world system is conceptual. I guess that's a little quick jab, which in effect is an argument for egalitarianism. It's not Marxist. It's Soroist, as in George Soros. That's a very important clarifying clause. Soros has influence with the pontiff on finances and poverty. Inequality is a prejudicial concept, I guess, because it assumes that one with less deserves the same as one with more. There is nothing in the document that addresses what already is being done by wealthier nations, by investment in less developed nations, and in poverty-stricken areas, mainly remote places in Africa, parts of Asia, where access is extremely difficult due to terrain, lack of infrastructure, unfriendly politics, and local hostility. Soros and the present Vatican promote a level playing field in which wealth is shared with equal distribution and talent is rewarded. It's more indicative of idealism run amok and arrogant disdain for the perceived wealthy corporate enemy blamed for poverty than justice. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, too much going on here.
Soroist is a really good economic philosophy. I've never heard that term before, but now I know. Now I can add that one to my repertoire.
Yeah, a new leftist political tendency I did not know about.
But that's a wild take. I like the idea of the kind of Soros conspiracy behind everything, including the Vatican. So Soros is paying Black Lives Matter activists. He's paying all kinds of other folks, but he's also got the ear of the Pope. So Pope Soros, Cardinal Soros, whatever you want to call him, apparently he's pulling all the strings at the old Vatican bank.
Hang on, I got to look up something about George Soros really quick. Is he Catholic even? No, I don't think so. That's so weird. Okay, so I just Googled this because I had to get to the bottom of this connection between Subcomandante Soros and the Pope. I can't really find the connection. I don't really understand what it is. He apparently invited Pope Francis to speak at something, and that was kind of it. I don't know. It's so weird.
I think the connection only exists in the broken brains of Alex Jones listeners.
I think so too. Cool. Well, there you go. There's a lot of problems in that comment. Besides that, especially I do the comment about they don't even say anything about what the wealthier countries are doing to help more poverty-stricken areas like Africa or Asia. Should the document have mentioned colonialism explicitly or something? That's how they got there in the first place. All right. Well, that's wild. Okay, here's another comment that is, I think, just as spicy, honestly. The position on economic inequality is very disappointing. Some of what they wrote seems to come straight out of the writings of Karl Marx. Do they not recognize the free markets along with personal liberty bring more people out of poverty than any centrally managed economic system? While free markets will never be perfect since populations within them will always consist of imperfect people, there has never been a system that empowers individuals to improve their lots in life as much as these based on freedom. I recall that when I was broke, I thought putting $1 in the weekly collection basket was a big deal. I thought the same thing about paying $15 a week out of my paycheck in income taxes. As a result of relatively free market economy, I now employ people who receive good wages and benefits under pleasant working conditions. I pay them.
Believe that.
Yeah, I know. I pay them significant levels of income taxes and am privileged to contribute regularly to over 50 charities, most of which are connected to my beloved Catholic Church. Oh my gosh.
Sweet Mama Church.
Yeah. This is not going to happen in centrally controlled economies because government bureaucrats and regulators do not have a clue as to how to create and manage businesses that produce goods and services that people actually want. It is unfortunate that the CDF, which is the organization that I think issued this document, has taken an Obama-esque view of economics. They need to adhere to their mission and promote teaching on our Christian duties to care for the poor without telling us that the economy needs to be tightly regulated government planners. Their socialistic views, if more widely adopted, will increase world poverty, not alleviate it. Oh my gosh, there's so much stuff going on here. I think my favorite part of this comment, though, is just like, I employ workers and they love it. And it's like, I am only imagine how pleasant of a person this is to work for based on this one comment alone.
I mean, he contributes to over 50 charities, so the good news is, in the event that you actually get bad wages from this guy, one of his charities might come around and help you fill up your pantry.
Oh my gosh. In one way or another, he's got you. He's got your back, so.
one way or another is exactly right. Yeah, I especially like the idea that this is construed as a socialistic document when it is like explicitly. I mean, we'll talk about this more later, but it goes out of its way to keep reminding you that like that's not what it's doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just like anything other than brutal libertarianism, I guess, is socialism.
Yeah. Well, also the conflation of writing straight from Karl Marx and an Obama-esque view of economics is really great. Those two things are exactly the same, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. I remember after 2008 when Obama started quoting Karl Marx and just nationalizing all kinds of industries immediately. That was a really, really Obama-esque economic situation.
He was crazy about that. The socialization of all social programs and goods. Yeah, that's true. He did that.
Well, speaking of socialism, I'll go ahead and read another comment that we've got here. So this one's quite short. The person says, equalization and redistribution says it all. These are very poorly coded words for socialism. In the end, that's what these bishops seek, misery for the masses. Dear fathers, just asking, but who will be doing the distributing? El Che?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be cool. I'm down with that one.
Yeah, I would be also very cool with that. I don't know a whole lot of bishops who would be personally, but I'd like to meet them.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, one more and then we'll get into it. This is probably my favorite comment of all of them, and it goes a little something like this. First off, I'd like to say that it sounds like it could have been written by a communist. Second, it sounded all bad and said nothing about the good of free enterprise, so it is not written by a true Christian.
Jesus himself often preached about the good of free enterprise, so that's how you know.
Jesus was constantly talking about generating wealth for the sake of wealth. That was like his whole thing.
Yeah, right after distributing all those loaves and fishes, he gave that really famous sermon about free enterprise and how important it is.
That's right. The loaves and fishes were actually just free samples to get the masses hooked.
That's it. Just sitting behind that food court glass, handing it right over on a toothpick.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, cool. Well, if people think this much weird stuff about a document, it must be worth reading, and I think that this one is. So let's get into it. Dean, get us started here. Tell us where to start.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's actually just sort of move through it. We'll pick out like a couple of pieces of the text and just unpack it and kind of identify some themes as we go. I think that, so I already said a bunch of stuff on Twitter, so I don't know if you follow me, then sorry, you're going to hear it again. But what I think is most interesting about these comments and reading this document is that if you are a Marxist, you're actually probably going to be sort of frustrated by a number of things that happen. But if you are looking for a kind of open door to maybe start arguing for a more kind of Marxist influenced economic position within the Catholic Church, the document actually could potentially help you. Not on purpose, but like you could reroute it in that direction. So
yeah, you got to read it kind of sideways.
Exactly. So I think the opening paragraph is kind of a good place because it starts out sort of acknowledging neoliberalism in a way, and then also kind of contains maybe a reason for a Marxist critique of its own document, but it kind of leaves that open. So it says, what is needed on the one hand is an appropriate regulation of the dynamics of the market, and on the other hand, a clear ethical foundation that assures a well-being realized through the quality of human relationships, rather than merely through economic mechanisms that by themselves cannot attain it. So I feel like those are sort of things that a lot of Marxists can get behind. Maybe we'd want to be a little stronger on the idea of like regulating the dynamics of the market, for example. But the idea that we should have a kind of economic life that is founded on like humans interacting with each other rather than certain like economic mechanisms controlling the way in which we relate to each other, that's something that Marx himself is really kind of intent on, and he has a really, you know, sentimental, in a positive sense, side to him about how basically one big problem in capitalism is that it just stops humans from being able to hang out and like have a good time and spend time with each other without these kind of moneyed mediations or like the fight for survival, which I think like in that sense, this is actually a document that points us toward that sort of side of like a Marxist ethic, a very like human or personalist sort of Marxism.
Yeah, I agree. I think that probably most of those commenters really had only read this first paragraph because it's like, you know, this is one of those really strong points in the document where it actually just says something against free market about, you know, letting the market kind of decide for itself. But yeah, I think this is a good starting point. Why not?
Yeah. Another thing we should mention too that's sort of quite good is the document says that there's no sort of universal or timeless economic formulas, which is pretty interesting and something that I feel like should probably get a lot more press than even some of the headlines that have come out of this document, because it suggests that maybe something like Marxism is an economic formula or contains economic formulas that would actually be useful, not necessarily it doesn't assume that capitalism is kind of a once and for all economic problem, like the end of history or whatever, that you
right.
just sort of solve those problems, you've got it all sorted out. So like that's also maybe something that Marxists can really pick on, is that they've left the door open, so you might as well walk through it.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty radical idea if you think about it.
Yeah.
Just saying that there's a possibility that there could be a different economic situation. It's something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's radical in the sense that it leaves the door open for Marxism. It's also terrible in the sense that it also leaves the door open for a lot of other bad things too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, okay, we'll get to it maybe later.
Anything sort of stick out for you in the beginning of this at all, Matt?
Well, I think that's pretty good for the beginning. On the second page, it's sort of broken up into points. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think the next one we should talk about is number 5. It's skipping ahead a little bit, but it's a good one. So it says, although there have been many positive efforts at various levels which should be recognized and appreciated, there does not seem to be any inclination to rethink the obsolete criteria that continue to govern the world. So here it's kind of getting into that idea that we just mentioned a little bit, that that there's possible other economic systems that are available that maybe speak to other situations. I guess there's an openness that's there that I really appreciate, even though it is, I think, mostly a liberal document in terms of its economic ideas. There is an openness that I think is lacking in a lot of thinking about economics. It is liberal for sure. I'll keep saying that forever, but it is less ideological than it could be, and that's nice.
Yeah, that's right. I like too that it says there's no inclination to rethink the obsolete criteria that continue to govern the world. I mean, if you're a Marxist, you hear that and you think, yeah,
exactly.
Capitalism is that obsolete criteria, right?
Yeah.
And the document doesn't go that far, but again, it opens that door. And I think that's actually really good. Like, there aren't a lot of people who are willing to talk about obsolete criteria. A lot of people think, the way that capitalist economics has figured everything out is kind of just how it is, and you just got to smooth out all the wrinkles and then it will keep on working. But that's not true. And especially it's not true because capitalism has a sort of nature of crisis within it. And one of the wild things about this document is it actually kind of recognizes that. It doesn't really say it in those terms, but it recognizes a sort of inbuilt fallibility to capitalism. So it keeps suggesting that all the regulations that you would come up with would have to be flexible and plastic and would need to be able to be sort of modified, which, again, you called it earlier, Matt, a sort of Keynesian, ethical Keynesianism, which I think is exactly right. But yeah, anyway, that idea of that there are obsolete criteria and that we could actually rethink them is a really important point.
Yeah. Well, right after number 5, I think comes the part that we should parse out a little bit more. You mentioned it just a minute ago, but it says, furthermore, this document acknowledges that there do not exist universally valid economic formulas for every moment. So I think, again, like I like this because it does kind of open that door, but it is kind of a denial of that immortal science of Marxism-Leninism. And I don't really have a huge problem with that being the case, but what do you think, Dean? Is it? I mean, that's how people talk a lot about that's how people talk about Marxism-Leninism and Marxism-Leninism. Oh my gosh, and Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. In my neck of the woods, in a lot of like the post-Marxist literature and philosophy I've read, people don't really think of Marxism as a science really in the same way that other folks do. So to me, this is, I think, really good that this document acknowledges that there are no universally valid economic formulas. I think that's probably good because economic situations should be pretty plastic. However, on the other hand, I do kind of get the problem that the insights of historical materialism are actually pretty good, and they at least are supposed to be universal. I don't know. What do you think? There's a tension there, I think, between what we're talking about usually and what's going on in this document.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think we've mentioned this on the podcast before. Like, I share the kind of suspicion toward considering Marxism as a kind of dogmatic science. And I've always been really resistant to talking about Marxism as a science for a lot of reasons, partly because of, I guess, a kind of weird philosophy of science that I've internalized, or weird suspicion toward science. But I also just read a great article in the Monthly Review about Marxism as a kind of open system and open science.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, conceived in that way, that's quite interesting and cool. But that too would also kind of presuppose that there's not a universally valid economic formula either, which is pretty good, right? That actually a good materialist analysis doesn't presuppose like timeless truths that have to do with like economic arrangements, but rather tries to respond to economic arrangements as they arise in time and in history. So in that sense, like, I think it's only like really crass and sort of somewhat like novice Marxists, I think, that kind of latch on to that idea of Marxism-Leninism as a kind of like scientific, dogmatically scientific investigation of the world that concludes things and then that's it. Whereas I think there's a really good case to be made that even the kind of science of Marxism, if you have to call it a science, is quite a sort of open-ended process on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to conceptualize it that way, I think I'm down. Like, that whatever the situation is, like, if Marxism-Leninism being a science means responding to the material conditions, then I guess, like, that's kind of a scientific, that's fine. But it is super open, right? It's like, materialism is more, to me, a philosophical commitment than it is a scientific one.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know. It makes sense.
Yeah. I think what I like most about it is that it's about this point that they make in the document is that it's a really good critique of like Margaret Thatcher's "there is no alternative" statement, right? That like capitalism is just it, and that's all it's ever going to be, and that's just how humans are, right? Like she has that other famous statement: "There's no such thing as society." And like this document, you can almost feel that they're I don't know if it's direct or indirectly, but they're definitely going after that exact sentiment. Like they go out of their way to talk about how humans kind of emerge out of like communities and family life and all this other stuff, and they're not kind of isolated atomic like bundles of will that just meet each other and have economic transactions. Like they're people. And so that's like a cool thing that I'm willing to kind of give them as well.
Yeah, I think so. This is kind of out of left field, but this is what it makes me think of, at least. Like, not only, I think, is Marxism, if it is considered as a science, a very open science, but, like, Christianity is also pretty open in its understanding of, like, how it interacts with history. I mean, this is an idea that I think I got first when I read your PhD stuff, Dean, but that Christianity is, like, really plastic, right? It changes over time. It looks differently. There's no Christianity, but just a lot of different sort of Christianities being deployed everywhere. It really makes me think of this book that I read once that was really wild called The Canticle for Leibowitz, which is like the only Christian science fiction book I think that I've ever read and ever want to read. But basically it's like a post-apocalyptic world where there's an order of monks. And what I like about it is it just demonstrates that like the church has always been like hierarchically, the church is geared towards sort of like a flexibility, and that it can take up lots of different forms throughout history. And I don't know, that should make us feel maybe suspicious of the church, but also maybe kind of good about tradition and how it can like reach backwards and forwards in some dynamic ways.
Yeah, I think so. No, that's good. We can also kind of use that as a good way to talk about how this document is sort of trying to wrestle with its own tradition, the Catholic social teaching tradition about economics.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it sort of draws from this relational personalism, you could call it. So there's all kinds of stuff in here about the dignity of the human person and how that's one of the big problems for them with how capitalism exists now, is that it ignores that dignity and it makes it more and more difficult for people to see it in each other. And there's something about that that's actually true and existentially real. But I think that, I don't know if this works for you, Matt, but tell me if it does, but I feel like this document could maybe be called something like communionism rather than communism. So the idea is like people are kind of coming together and intentionally supposed to come together, and that's what they're after, rather than dealing with the kind of change in like the mode of production that might encourage other kinds of social relationships.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, communism sounds nice. I'd rather have communism, but yeah, why not?
Yeah. Well, but I guess that's the way of like distinguishing it from something like communism.
Yeah.
It's not, it's after that sort of like personal response to the problems in the world rather than like a real structural political change.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. I mean, which is nice. It's a super humanistic like approach to political economy, which I mean I'm okay with.
Yeah, well, up to a point, I guess. Like they do all the stuff about egoism, right? That
yeah.
One of the big problems that comes out is like people are just too greedy or like too self-absorbed, and if we made this kind of ethical call to them, then maybe like things would change. And I think that that's a really kind of tough myth that we inherit from liberalism and also from just Christianity in general.
Right.
That if you change the hearts of people, then like you'll change the whole world. But like Christians have been telling people to change their hearts for like 2,000 years, and not only did it not stop capitalism, like Christians made capitalism up. So I'm not like too keen on that. Like I think what I think is sort of dangerous. I mean, like, I know that obviously you're not arguing for that sort of a diagnostic criteria, but I think for me what's dangerous about the egoism critique is that, like, yes, it's true, there's lots of greedy people in the world, no doubt about that, but, like, by kind of hanging their like, hat on that hook, they end up missing the broader problems, or, like, why people get greedy, or why greed really works quite well in capitalism.
Right, for sure. Or even that, like, well, I don't know. I guess, like, egoism and capitalism to me seems like way too much like a simple explanation for what's going on. Like, I don't know, you can find plenty of altruistic people in capitalism, actually, but they like would practice altruism given the opportunity, I think, but they don't understand sort of the ways that they have benefited from the economic system that already exists. So it's not like they're like necessarily super greedy people. They're just like rich because their family is rich, and they don't recognize like that as being part like of it's not like they chose to be rich, or it's not like they're choosing to hoard all their wealth. They probably just like don't even see their wealth as a real problem.
Yeah,
I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Is that they
totally.
It's not that
you're right.
It's not that people are like greedy necessarily all the time. It's just that people can't see their own, like, the limits of their own privilege or something.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, for sure. All right, Matt, so I'll throw another one at you here, kind of coming off what we were just talking about with people being good and kind of it relying on people being good. So in section 15, the document says the financial dimension of the business world, focusing business on the access of money through the gateway of the world of stock exchange, is as such something positive. So I guess this like goes to that commenter's worry about how they don't say anything about free enterprise. Like throughout the whole document, they actually say quite a bit about how it's really good, and they like go out of their way to sort of affirm that. But I guess like Matt, I'm curious what you think of how that relates to like some of their like placing their own kind of emphasis on personal change.
Okay, so this statement number 15 is actually really strange. So the part that precedes it really complicates, I think, what is going on in the statement. So right before the part you read, Dean, it says, money is itself an instrumental good, as are many other things at the disposal of the human person, and is a means to order one's freedom and to expand one's possibilities. Nevertheless, the means can easily turn against the person. Likewise, the financial dimension of the business world, focusing business on the access of money through the gateway of the world stock exchange, is as such something positive. But then it kind of goes on to give a critique of speculative transactions and the stock exchange too. So it is playing off of that idea, it kind of shoves away like the financial capitalist model that we have today, but it wants something different that is even weirder, as money as an instrument of the individual. So it's like the stock exchange is bad, but it's bad because like people could just make better decisions directly or something. It's like a critique that's like, again, relying on the individual person as an actor in the world, with kind of disconnected from the larger political economy that they're within. And that's fundamentally a problem if you can't even get kind of to the root of like what's driving the economy. If you think that like, you know, individual consumers or individual people with capital are the drivers of the economy instead of like organized business and labor markets or something, it's really a strange idea.
Yeah, that's right. I think this is something too that just kind of comes out throughout the document here and elsewhere, where the basic assumption is both that like individuals should be good, but also that in a really fundamental way, it isn't capitalism itself that is flawed. It's like a certain direction that capitalism has gone in, and you could maybe like put it in a different direction and everything would be fine. You know, the problem isn't like the accumulation of private property or like exorbitant inequality or anything like that. It's like the problem is when those things kind of get like a little too far removed from like regular people. And I guess like that's the kind of thing that Marx is always after, like in Capital, right? That it isn't even necessarily that people like want to be bad or like create inequality or whatever. It's like the way that like you make money in a capitalist society is precisely by doing those things, like by going to those extremes and like transcending limits that you put up for yourself. And I think like that's kind of just a weird thing that happens, is they keep wanting like different kinds of limits or like to push the global economy in like different kinds of directions, but there's something like wrong with like what you were just saying, Matt, the root of it. Like they're kind of dealing with the branches instead of kind of going to see where those branches grow out of or something.
Yeah, it's just such a strange idea to me, because it's like the corrective they're offering is like a corrective of individual virtue, right? Like it seems like right. It seems like if people were just better people, if they just practice like sort of like the right Christian virtues better, you know, maybe things wouldn't quite be so bad. But it neglects the fact that like those people are in the middle of a political economy that like functions on them being bad. So like, why would they? Like if the people, okay, if the right virtue would correct the people in the economy, why wouldn't the right virtue also correct the economy itself, like the sort of political economy itself? So why like go and just say people should just, you know, use their money in this different good instrumental way, rather than saying like we should just make the idea of money only serve people in a good instrumental way or something, like design a system that does that. So it's just like a weird, to me, like a weird like asymmetry or a wrong, just like the wrong place to look for the problem.
Right. Yeah, even what you're saying is like interesting, because there are so many Thomists in the Catholic Church who are for that very reason against capitalism, right? Like it doesn't encourage you to be virtuous. Yeah. Like, so like what's that about? My criticism right here is, I guess, like a structural point, and like one that's probably based in like base and superstructure type of thinking or something, but I don't know. Thomas can do it. Why not get there? Yeah, for sure. All right, so maybe coming off that, I know I just put one to you, but I'm gonna put another one to you.
God, man.
I know. I've got you in the hot seat here.
Ooh. Phone a friend.
So they have an analogy that they go to that is kind of wild. So this is in section 19. They say, thanks to globalization and digitalization, the markets can be compared to a giant organism through whose veins, like living sap, flow huge amounts of money. This analogy allows us to speak of the health of such an organism when its means and structures are functioning well, and the growth and diffusion of wealth go hand in hand. The health of a system depends on the health of every single action performed. In a healthy market system, it's easier to respect and promote the dignity of the human person and the common good. So what do you think, Matt? What's this big animal called the market?
Oh my god, I'm so here for this comment, actually. So several years ago when I was finishing up my master's degree, I wrote my thesis on why capitalism is a body without organs, which is like a Deleuzian term that no one cares about. Anyway, so whenever anyone describes the market as an animal or as an organism with veins, with life-giving sap, I'm like, yeah, no kidding. It's exactly like that. So I think that this is actually like a really good description of how the market actually does work, but they get it a little bit wrong. Like, the market is not a healthy body. If anything, like, healthy bodies know how to like regulate sort of their intake and output, and like know how to upkeep themselves. Like, healthy bodies can like get haircuts and like can take a shower and stuff like that. The market is like fundamentally not a healthy body. The market is more like have you ever seen Attack on Titan?
Yeah.
Like, the market is like one of those big like zombie babies that attacks the city and eats people whole. Like, the market is something that doesn't know how to like stop consuming. It doesn't know how to stop purging. It doesn't know how to stop bloodletting itself, or like, you know, just consuming nonstop. So like, they're not wrong. Like, the health of a system depends on the health of every single action performed. Like, that's true. But like, this is a body that's fundamentally only has like maybe like 3 parts to it. Like, if the market were a body, it has a mouth, it has a stomach, and it has a butt, and like it's constantly just cycling through those things. It consumes and it purges. So I like this picture, but it's kind of, they're being way too optimistic or way too nice about what the market as organism actually looks like. Because markets do like one thing. They like consume and expand, and like they get bigger and they find more places to consume and expand, and like they find ways to sort of purge itself of the thing it doesn't need anymore. And like, that's what the market does. That is the market as an organism.
I like that a lot. Also very gross in a good way.
Super gross. Yeah.
It's funny because later on they like continue this analogy a little bit, and they talk about what they call a financial biodiversity.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes me think of the market as a horrible super predator that just like eats itself out of its own environment, right? Like, it eats all the available prey till there isn't any left, and then it like moves on, or it just collapses on itself or something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the biodiversity thing is so strange because like, that's just a really nice way to sort of paint that picture, because like, what it means is just like, it's just more things that it can interact with and generate profit from.
Yeah, that's right.
Going back a bit, I mean, like, so I think it's a nice picture. I think they just get some of it wrong. Something that we skipped over, but I want to move back to it really quick, is number 17. Did you read that one? It says...
Yeah, that's a really good moment.
Yeah, so it says, what is morally unacceptable is not simply to profit, but rather to avail oneself of an inequality for one's own advantage. In order to create enormous profits that are damaging to others, or to exploit one's dominant position in order to profit by unjustly disadvantaging others, or to make oneself rich through harming and disrupting the collective good. I guess to me, this is like, this is the corrective that their number 19 and their number 20 actually really need. That like, the organism of market can't just be one that's like let loose to do whatever, and in sort of a biodiverse ecosystem that it's in. Like, it needs rules for itself. It needs a logic that is an alternate of just like expansion and consumption.
Yeah, though I think they try to provide that, even here in this criticism, right? That like, the only way you get a healthy sort of organism, to stick with their analogy, is to kind of put it in the right kinds of limits, like where you respect, you know, each part within or something like that. But the tough thing about it is like, so they say what's morally unacceptable is not simply to profit, but to avail oneself of an inequality for one's own advantage. But like, that is what capitalism is, right?
Yeah.
Like, how could you ever profit without availing yourself of an inequality for your own advantage? Like, that is literally what it means to gain private wealth, to like expropriate the surplus labor of your workers.
Right.
That there's no way to get profit other than that.
Yeah, because if you did not avail yourself of an inequality for your own advantage, you just pay your workers like all of the money that they're owed.
Yeah, exactly.
They would get all of your profits, and you wouldn't be the boss anymore. Which, if that's the point, then cool. But I don't think that's what they intend. They, mean something else. There's a certain vagueness to a lot of this too that is, I guess, characteristic of sort of moral religious language that I'm not a fan of. So,
right, yeah,
whatever.
I will say though, like in all these kind of critical moments, there's actually a really nice paragraph in section 17, and it reminded me a little bit of like what Marx famously kind of describes communism as in the German ideology. So they say, what is demanded is an initiative above all for the renewal of humanity in order to reopen the horizons towards that abundance of values which alone permits the human person to discover himself or herself and to construct a society that is a hospitable and inclusive dwelling place with room for the weakest and where wealth is used for the benefit of all, places where it is beautiful for human beings to live and easy for them to have hope. And that is a paragraph that could have come out of Marx, like to go to something that that commenter says sort of critically, right? That like that kind of society is exactly why we don't want capitalism, why Marxists don't want capitalism. And it reminds me of that moment where Marx describes communism as like basically like waking up in the day, doing a little bit of work, going fishing, being a philosopher, and then like going home. Like that's what communism is.
Right. Yeah, Marx could have written that paragraph. Soros could have written that paragraph. Either one of them.
The immortal science of George Sorosism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really uplifting. I think that's good, and I think that's great. But again, I think there's that vagueness characteristic of moral language and religious sort of like political theology kind of stuff.
Right.
Well, okay, so we got that really good positive moment. Let's skip ahead to something that's a little bit less cool. Let me pitch you this one, Dean. Turning the tables.
Yeah, okay.
This is number 22. It says, a healthy financial system also requires the maximum amount of information possible so that every agent can protect his or her interest in full. Glad they're being inclusive with that language. So that every agent can protect his or her interest in full and with complete freedom. It is in fact important to know if one's capital is used for speculative purposes, and also to know the degree of risk and the adequate price of the financial products to which one subscribes. Yeah, what do you think? This is kind of weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. I don't like this paragraph for a lot of reasons, but I'll just name two of them, I guess. So one is, it's like a really weird kind of libertarian argument, right? Like you should just vote with your dollar, and that depends on like properly informing consumers. So like, who cares if your food is like irradiated to hell? Just put a label on it, and then people can decide if they want it or not. And like, if enough people decide, then it'll go one way or the other. And I think that just fundamentally misses like how human beings operate. Even if you're a good Catholic, like Catholics don't think that like the intellect is the primary driver of human beings. There's all kinds of other things going on. There's desire, and there's sinful desire at that, right? Like it's not just information that you kind of sift through and then act on or don't act on. And that is not going to save the planet or vulnerable people. I think the second thing that frustrates me about it is that, like, I just don't want to have to care about this. Like, I have so many other things that I have to think about and care about every single day. Like, the last thing I want to do is worry about, like, what I'm buying into or, like, where my money is going if I, like, buy this product or that product. Like, I want to live in a society where I can just kind of be assured that probably it's going to the right place, and I like don't live in one of those. And I think that's really frustrating. Like I want to be free from that burden of information.
Right. That's a really funny idea, actually. I mean, this reminds me of I don't know, my mom, everyone's mom, all of the moms who are like making sure everything is like organic, GMO free, that it was grown like on a farm where they like sang to the vegetables and they all had names and stuff, right? It's like you want to make sure that like you're not supporting some kind of terrible business, but like the voting with your dollar thing is fundamentally flawed because there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. However, at the same time, I am kind of sympathetic to this whole thing because, I don't know, like a few weeks ago when we were trying to source Magnificast shirts, we were like worried about this exact thing. But point taken, I don't want to have to worry about this. I mean, like instead of a political economy where we have to play like, we have to take notes about like what country our t-shirts are coming from, it would be cool if we just knew that no matter where they came from, like workers were like paid the right amount because they own the means of production or something.
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's frustrating that part of the solution here is like, well, it's not the system's fault that you have to know all that stuff. It's kind of your fault. Like, you've got to know it. And then you have to make the right decision based on that information. And I think just like putting the moral impetus on consumers is just really, really missing like the big picture and kind of foisting responsibility in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, what if instead of that, it was just like a call for all Catholics who own businesses, like that really nice commentator from the very beginning, whose employees love to work for him? What if it was just instead a call to like, hey, make sure that you make business decisions with your employees? Like, that would be like a way better idea.
Right. There's actually, so like we can back up in a sec, but later on in section 33, they really like double down on this point actually. So they say, all that we have been talking about so far is not only the work of an entity that operates out of our control, but that is also in the sphere of our responsibilities. This means that we have within our reach important instruments capable of contributing toward the solution of many problems. For instance, the markets live thanks to the supply and demand of goods. In this regard, every one of us can influence in a decisive manner by giving shape to that demand. And then they go on to talk about like shopping.
Yeah.
So they say shopping is a daily engagement with which we procure the necessities of living, and also a form of a choice that we exercise among the various products that the market offers. And they go on to basically talk about how like, yeah, you should just like really know a lot about like every supply chain, I guess. So that's quite frustrating, I think.
It's frustrating too because it's not like supply chains want you to know about them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, a huge job of public relations and marketing is making sure that they are opaque and that you do not know where they come from and that you don't know about the labor behind them. You don't know how many people like didn't get bathroom breaks when they were making the hot dogs that you just ate or something. It's like the point. I don't know. It's just like such a letdown of an idea about political agency in the world. Like, well, just like research where your stuff's coming from and then, buy the good stuff. And it's like, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah. It's like, in fairness to them, I guess, it's kind of like, well, you have to live under capitalism, so you should like do your best to live an ethical life in the situation that you're in. And like, that's true. No doubt about that. I mean, it's stressful, but like, I try to do that as far as I'm able, but at the end of the day, like, it's kind of like a really kind of depressing consolation prize. Like, you can be the best that you can be in a system that makes you necessarily bad.
Yeah.
I think, like, I don't know, like, I would much rather hear, I guess, a kind of moral declaration against the fact that there's a society that, like, intentionally makes you guilty all the time, no matter how hard you try to be good, rather than to, like, affirm like the kind of drops in the bucket of goodness that you do every day or whatever.
Right. It's a letdown.
All right. Well, okay. So there's a bunch of kind of letdowns, but maybe we should like end this on a note that tries to affirm some of the good stuff in here. Beyond just like the utopic stuff, they do talk a lot about like trying to hold different people responsible for financial disasters and, the evils that happen. Like, there is a certain kind of structural critique, and it's not all just personal. So, for example, like in section 27, they talk about how like there needs to be real kind of reckonings with the fact that there's a basically institutionalized criminalization in a lot of speculative finance in particular. And, like, they go out of their way to mention the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. And, the subtext there is, like, how come these guys didn't, like, get prosecuted or go to jail? And that I can really appreciate, because that's not the kind of thing that you hear from most, even, like, moral authorities who are upset about capitalism.
Yeah, for sure. That's pretty good. There's also this kind of funny part. I mean, I think it has good intentions, but it kind of comes off being really weird. That's in 31 about tax avoidance. Did you catch that bit?
Yeah.
It says tax avoidance on the part of primary stakeholders, those large financial intermediaries who move the market, indicate an unjust removal of resources from the actual economy. This is damaging for the civil society as a whole. So it's basically like you should pay your taxes.
Yeah.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of I mean, like in the United States, I mean, Dean, you're not that far removed, but like people hate paying their taxes. But like, what if you lived in a society where the things that you paid your taxes for were actually good and you liked it? That'd be pretty wild.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I think the most uplifting part of the article for me is this little bit in number 23. I'll just read it here and we can talk about it for a minute, maybe. It says, wherever mere profit is placed at the summit of the culture of a financial enterprise and the actual demands of the common good are ignored, every ethical claim is perceived as irrelevant. This is reported...
Nice.
Yeah, let me read just a little bit more because it's so good. This is reported today as a fact and is very much widespread, even in the prestigious business schools. I'm not sure if that one's true, but you never know. Every ethical claim is actually perceived as irrelevant and juxtaposed to the entrepreneurial action. This is very much highlighted from that fact that in the organizational logic, those who do not adjust to business targets of this type are penalized both at the retributive level and at the level of professional recognition. So, I mean, like the bottom part clarifies some other things, but I like the way that it states at the very beginning. It's a really strong statement that I think we can take and kind of run with in some different ways. That every ethical claim is really perceived as irrelevant if mere profit is sort of the pursuit of financial enterprise. I think that's something that means some things that the authors of this press release did not intend, but like respecting private property is an ethical claim, and it could definitely be perceived as irrelevant if profit is placed at the summit of the culture of a financial enterprise. So I think that is something worth thinking about. I mean, it's just like it's a good logic that is outside of the way we think about ethics usually. That ethics could be irrelevant if the common good is ignored. And really makes you think.
But I think though what they're getting at though, right, is that people in business, they perceive these ethics as irrelevant. Like they might talk about business ethics or whatever, but ultimately the point is to get more money, right?
Yeah.
So they perceive it as irrelevant, even though like they might pay lip service to it or something. But I guess what you're saying is like in such a situation, because the ethics are actually irrelevant, like you wouldn't have to worry about respecting private property or something. Is that what you're after?
Yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is if you read it wrong,
yeah,
it gets better.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Reading things wrong on purpose is a really good reading strategy.
Well, especially when they're so vague, and especially when they're about ethics. I mean, I know that it is disingenuous, but at the same time, like they're inviting themselves to it.
Yeah. Yep, I think so. I mean, that's kind of the, I guess, like if we had to have a sort of wrap up point, I think that's something that we've been kind of dancing around throughout the whole conversation, is that they leave themselves open unintentionally to all kinds of like further radicalizations of points that they make in this document. And maybe like the kind of Christian leftist task is to both like greet these kinds of press releases with a certain amount of skepticism and suspicion, but also greet them with the intention of taking them more seriously than their authors do.
Yeah.
And really like pushing the points as far as they actually naturally go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. At my school, in my institution, there's an idea that we use a lot here called over-accepting. And usually it's like, whenever anyone says over-accepting in a conversation at Greenville, it's usually like everyone in the room will collectively roll their eyes. But I think in this context, it's good. You have to find ways to say, like, yes and to these types of things. Like this is what they're saying, and like how do we do it and take it extremely seriously and like make it really work. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So
yeah, that's right.
So I can affirm some of these things if I read them from an angle.
Right. Yeah, I'm waiting for the like Christian situationist détournement of this document.
It's a good idea. Someone should do that.
Yeah, Friendly Anarchism and the like Friendly Fire Collective should do it.
Yeah, I think they are more creative than us and definitely have the sort of brains for it.
Yeah, they also have that good, just like anarchist aesthetic, which lends to being fun and playful.
Yeah, definitely.
Not like these boring scientific Marxists
I know. Too much science over here.
sitting in the lab all day.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can go and support us on Patreon. You should do that, even if you didn't like it.
Especially if you didn't like it.
Yeah, for sure. You can find the Magnificast on two cool podcast networks. One's called Critical Mediations, the other one's called Theology Corner. Find us on both of them. There's lots of other good there's lots of other good podcasts on them as well. Friendly Anarchism, Rev Left Radio is on Critical Mediations. I like that one a lot. So get listening to those for sure, and they're good. So just do it.
Gods and Ghosts.
Gods
Tyler
and
Hill,
Ghosts.
He's on Critical Mediations now.
Okay, so I do like Rev Left. Oh my gosh, I do like Rev Left Radio a ton. But Gods and Ghosts is like one of my favorite podcasts of all time. Tyler Hill is a good podcaster and a good storyteller. I'm so into it.
Yeah, check him out.
Sorry. Cool. We just wrapped up selling some t-shirts, so if you missed out, sorry, they're gone forever. You can never get one now. There should be shipping though next few days, so as you guys get your t-shirts, you can take a cool selfie of yourself wearing them in church or in your house, wherever you want to take them. I don't really care. But show off that good Magnificast swagnificast. Cool. All right. Well, as usual, thanks to Amoria. As usual, thanks to Amoria for our intro music because it's really cool, and thanks to the Illogical Spoon for our outro music. See you next time.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.